Hey there, how's it going? I'm Edwin, and welcome to your 11th Pebble development tutorial. Hey, I'm just jumping in quick here to say that this tutorial has no actual code that we're going to be working on together. It is just explanation, and it's because I realized after filming the explanation that it had been 20 whole minutes, and jumping into another 30 minutes of code into one whole tutorial would have just been crazy. So it will be in the next part, which is part 12. So if you want to skip the explanation and just jump into some code, go right to number 12. But otherwise, stick along. Thanks, guys, and sorry again. I am just going to briefly go over some stuff that's sort of off topic for a second here. I'm sorry if you've been following these and you've desperately wanted a tutorial lately and I haven't delivered. Life has been really, really busy, and if you've seen my update video I posted and then made private afterwards, basically I've just been insanely busy. It was exam time at school and summatives and everything, and I had 3 clients and I just didn't have any free time. And now is the first big chunk of free time I've gotten in a while that I haven't spent with my family. So here we are. Today I'm going to be showing you some JavaScript basics. So what is JavaScript used for? You might not have actually known how some of the Pebble apps work on your phone. So if you're on iOS or Android, you'll notice that a lot of Pebble apps will fetch the weather or gather other information from the internet, and they don't install an app on your phone. You can do this all through the Pebble app. So this is cross-platform. It's iOS and Android, and basically what the JavaScript does is it allows you to communicate with the internet and handle data through the phone as well. So you can use the phone for a big storage area, basically, if you wanted to. You can communicate with the internet, so like you can get weather, stocks, any sort of API data you want to. There are a few limitations that like they've cut out a few options for you to use, so it's not like full on JavaScript. I'm not 100% sure of that. You can look into that yourself. I'm not gonna be ignorant and tell you a bunch of stuff I don't actually know about. But it's really, really handy for grabbing simple information, transmitting that to the Pebble. I've seen really awesome use cases, like here on the chess app, you can see the third app on that screenshot. You can play multiplayer chess. They've done that through the JavaScript cross-platform. It's amazing. You don't have to use, a native app, and you can play with your friends online. And so, yep, the JavaScript also handles configuration screens. So you probably noticed apps like you see here in the screenshot have this little settings button. You hit it, it loads up a web page, and you can change around a few things like theme or whatever else the developer has enabled you to change. So how does it work? So JavaScript is basically run on event calls, such as app message or when the JavaScript is ready. It's not really, running every 5 seconds and, it's really inconsistent. It just runs when you need it to. As you know, it's cross-platform, and I've seen some people use JavaScript on Windows Phone. We'll just let them be. It is sandboxed from the rest of the Pebble app, so this means that you're not actually controlling the Pebble app. You can't mess around with, the native Pebble app. I've sort of dug around in my system storage on Android, and I've seen inside of the Pebble's internal file storage, and they keep each local storage. If you know what that is, local storage is like, if you don't know what that is, local storage is basically like a method of storing data in JavaScript that's really easy. So every app has its own file for local storage. It's very separated. You have your own environment. You can't touch other people's stuff. You can't mess around with other people. It's very separated. So your apps are safe. And for hackers or people who want to mess with other people, it might be a tough nut to crack, but give it a shot if you're willing to, I guess. And so it is activated. The JavaScript is basically opened when the foreground app is open, and it's deactivated when the foreground app is closed. So this means you cannot run the JavaScript in the background with a worker, which is sort of unfortunate, but it makes sense because you can only have one JavaScript app running at a time, and you don't want to have two collide and just be a big mess. So potential downside of this is, for example, with my one client, we've had to auto launch the app every 30 minutes to sync its data with the internet because we want it to be cross-platform and we don't have native apps for it yet. So you basically want to only use JavaScript for simple things and for a purpose like I've been using with my client, tracking standard deviation and steps and all of these other sorts of types of data. You'll probably want to use a native app because there are some restrictions. So a couple main functions or events I just want to show you before we dive into some code. So in your app info.json, I believe in the first tutorial I sort of glazed over it. You're going to want to add capabilities configurable. So basically what this allows you to do is just have a little settings icon there for the user to click. If you're in Cloud Pebble, you can go into the settings page on the IDE. Not the IDE settings, but you can go into the settings page for that app, and you can check on settings page, or I forget exactly what it's called, but there's an option for you to click, just save those settings, and you don't have to type any of this in. But this is just for people who are doing it manually like I am. So then the ready listener is sort of an important listener. You might not need it, but some people do for like fetching weather when you open the app. Basically how event listeners work is you assign it a certain string. So here we have ready, and whenever this ready is fired, it calls your function here. So function E, with E is the event, and whatever you want to run inside that function, you can run. So another handler we have here is app message. So it has to be, I believe it has to be exactly laying out how it is here. You can't have like part capitals, part not. You should have it exactly to the syntax Pebble has it as, or else it might screw up. I'm not exactly sure. I've just been following this method for my whole Pebble development career. So app message, this is fired whenever the Pebble sends a message to the JavaScript. The JavaScript says, hey, we got a message, let's handle this. And I just sort of cut out the last function part for sake of simplicity. So app messages, you might be wondering, what the heck, like, what's an app message? So an app message is basically, it's a message between apps. So your Pebble app is sending a message to the JavaScript. So pebble.sendAppMessage is the JavaScript's function for sending messages to the Pebble. We'll be looking at this in a minute. You can send strings, integers, and all sorts of types of data. I don't believe you can fire off decimal places though. So here's a quick example of some JavaScript side code. So here we have some 4 basic handlers you're probably going to use in the future. So ready, app message, show configuration, web view closed, and all 4 of these are fired on the event, as you know. So ready, we've gone over that. App message, we've gone over that. We're not handling anything here because in my next code sample, we're not sending anything back, but we can look into this in the next tutorial. So pebble.add event listener for show configuration. This is when the user hits the settings page button, as long as you have it set to configurable, as I've asked you to do here. So basically, whatever you want to run in that function, you can run pebble.openURL has to be called for this. So basically, what you could do is on a certain app message, if the value is if the value of the key is 3 or whatever, you could fire pebble.openURL, but if the screen's not on, then it might not work. So you just want to do this on show configuration. It works every time because the Pebble app is open, the screen is on, and and I just have a little console log here saying we're opening this URL, and console.log. If you're not familiar with JavaScript, I highly recommend you just go maybe Codecademy or some other similar site and try to learn a little bit of the syntax. It's sort of, it's not difficult to pick up, it's just different. Like, I believe, if I remember correctly, you don't have to have semicolons on some function calls, and there's like, there's a bunch of stuff you should probably just sort of look into so you get the feel for it. But the syntax is similar to C in the sense that it's not like Objective-C where it has all these square brackets and whatnot. So anyway, our last handler here, web view closed. All we have firing here, it's a little cut off, but I can explain it to you. It just tells the console, it says configuration closed. Oh yeah, console.log just logs whatever to the console, and if you're app logging, so we've looked at app_log on Pebble, this is the equivalent for JavaScript. But it doesn't have state, so you don't have info, error, debug, verbose, etc. So it's just checking as long as the response exists, otherwise it doesn't do anything because then they hit cancel or they're backed out. It gets the values from parsing the JSON response. So when we look into settings screen on the next tutorial, we will be looking at getting values from a JSON object. So basically, just to quickly explain it, on the web page, you enter all these settings and you hit save, it bundles them all up, sends them off to the Pebble.js, and then it passes it into this function with E. And inside the E, you can see here, it's just cut off, but it says it parses in the E object the values, and here on console log, I'm just logging the username, so I'm assuming that from the settings page, it's sending back a string with the username, and so we're just getting that with values.username since it's already parsed. And then with pebble.sendApp message, we're just sending it with the key username. You can define these keys in appinfo.json. We'll also be looking at this in the next tutorial, or maybe this tutorial actually, I'm sorry. I'm a little off my game. And then it just sends the values.username. And if that was too quick for you, that's fine, go back. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'm usually quick to respond as long as I'm connected to the internet, which I usually am. So I love to answer your questions. You can also email me if you don't want to answer you don't want to ask publicly. I strongly encourage you do if you have any questions. So here's some sample Pebble code I took from another app of mine. So basically, when I was learning Pebble development, way back in the day, Chris Lewis has a great tutorial online. I don't believe he's updated it in a while, but it's really well done, and I sort of took this snippet and I've been using it ever since because it's really reliable. And yeah, it looks, if you're not really a programmer or you're a little intimidated by all these brackets and just all this, don't be scared. Basically this bottom function, the void inbox function, you do not have to touch as long as you keep the process tuple function exactly the same syntax as it's defined here. So basically what this does is we're just going to be looking at the process tuple function. It takes in the key. So a key is like an assigned number. So 0 and up. I don't think you can have negative numbers. I don't know, I've never done that. But yeah, a key is like, you have a key 1, and you know that key 1 is going to have some sort of type data. So key 1 is going to be the theme. Key 2 is going to be this. Key 3 is going to be that. Every key, you sort of want to keep it so that each key has its own purpose. It can be confusing if you just sort of let it go willy wonky and all weird, and then it's just confusing. Keys are really handy for that. So what we have going on here is it grabs the key from the tuple. It's just T, pointer sign key. And then we're grabbing the value. So the T, the pointer here, has a value. And then you can go int32, int16, I believe int8, and like C string. So what I just do for ints is just int32 and make sure, it always has worked for me. I don't go any lower, it's sort of pointless. So then it checks if the key is not equal to 0 because I didn't need to log that in my app. Otherwise, if it is 0, it just returns. And then here on our switch, we'll be expanding this in the future to handle more keys. But in the switch here, it basically just goes over, it says, you know, on key 1, do this. So on key 1, it will pass in the value to this function, internet connection results. And that function will then handle the value from there. So I hope that makes sense to you. Just sort of summarize this. The inbox takes in all the tuples, so all the messages, and processes them while they exist, and then it closes off if they don't anymore. And the process tuple just takes in the key, so like the identifier takes the value, which is the actual value, and then you can handle it from there. And you know, this is a really handy function. I will put a link in the description to a paste bin where you can copy and paste this. And maybe I'll start uploading all of this code to GitHub soon. I should probably start doing that. We're 11 tutorials in. I mean, you know, if you're committed, you should have the code there to see. So anyway, just a quick summary of all that. So you should learn some JavaScript if you don't already know it that well. It's used to run internet-related functions cross-platform. It can also be used for secondary storage. It cannot be run in the worker, so make sure you keep this in mind because you don't want to build your apps around that and depend on it. You can't run it in the background. You can only run it when the foreground app is live. And, well, that's as of firmware 2.9, so where I'm at in time right now, but who knows what's going to happen at 3.0. All aboard the 3.0 hype train, by the way, if you're watching this before 3.0 is watched, or is launched. And the JavaScript is event-driven, so it's not constantly refreshing, checking if you have some message coming in. It just fires when you need it to, and it's really clean. And one last little point I didn't add here is it's sandboxed, so you're safe from other apps intruding your data, and you probably won't be able to get into other people's data. So I hope that all sort of made a little bit of sense, at least, to you guys. Again, feel free to go back and everything, you know, rewatch. And quick shout out to the person who keeps disliking all my videos. Yes, I've noticed you, and I'm sorry if I made you bitter in some way, but, you know, I'm sorry if I offended you. And that's it for right now. The next tutorial, we'll be jumping into some code, so look forward to that. If it's not already out, it'll be out really, really shortly. Thanks, guys, and have a great one.